Hello, my name is Kauthar Abdi, and today I'll be telling you the story of my childhood. And in Somali culture, when you tell a story, we say sheka sheko, and the recipient says sheka hariro. So here it is, sheka sheko. So my story begins in Somalia before the turmoil and war. It is my earliest memory of being in a place that is home, but I have never actually returned to ever since we left. And it starts with myself, a 3-year-old child, and my father visiting my aunt. And as we I remember walking into my aunt's veranda, and there stood a tall tree, spread out branches, and that the tree really was an important symbol of all Somali homes, because that's where people gathered, and that's where people escaped the scorching afternoon sun. And when we walk in, my cousins rush and they're like, up tea, maternal uncle in Somali, and they greet us, and I go off and I'm playing with them. But soon after playing with them, I had no idea that my father had a purpose for bringing me there. And he says, Kauthar, it's time for you to come and have your medicine. And I look at him and I'm like, I'm ready to be fighting with him and say, no, I will not be having this medicine. But before I can get that gumption going, or that desire to, that energy ready, my cousin flee from me and what we were doing to go over to him and like, Abdi, can we have some please? And he looks at me, I'm just confused. My fists are ready to fight, but what's there to fight if these people want to? Surely, what? And I just look at him, and I'm looking at the kids, and they're begging him, and they're looking at him, so, can we also have some, please? Can I have some? No, not her. Can I have some? And I said to myself, God, what's going on? And my father says, Kauthar, do you want me to give it to them? And I knew what my father was asking me, because he was asking, do you want me to give what's yours to them? And of course, I said, no. And he says, well, come. You should come and have some then. And I slowly walk over to him, knowing that if I change my mind, someone else is going to take what is mine. So I walk over to him, and he puts me on his lap, and he brings that spoon slowly closer to my mouth. And the kids are just all looking, their mouths salivating, waiting, wondering whether she's going to say no. And I don't say no. I hold myself. I open my mouth, close my eyes, and swallow it. And my father looks at me and he smiles, and my father smile, and he says to me, I'm so proud of you, Kauthar. And it is that desire to achieve that moment, I think, that has driven me to be the woman that I am today. Because every time I do something, I always go over to my dad and say, Dad, guess what? And that smile always pushes me and drives me and tells me that someone loves me and is proud of all the things I achieve. And that soon after that time, or rather after we've spent a bit of time at my aunt's, we said goodbye, and we went over to meet my mom, who was at her father's house. So as you walk to my grandparents' house, my granddad is sitting outside with the old man, which is a tradition. People come and sit together and have tea at someone's house every day. And my grandfather had his friends there. They're having aromatic tea with cinnamon and cardamom and cloves. And he sees me and he stands up. And my grandfather was a very tall, dark Somali man. He had, veins going up. And I remember thinking, what a beautiful human being. And I still think of him in that way. And he was like this gentle giant, and he'd pick me up. And when he held me, I just towered over everyone. Obviously, that station and that height that he had was not just a physical appearance, but it was also, the standing that he had within the community and within his own family. And there, my father is standing there, and my mother comes along to greet us as well. And that, for me, is a memory of a land that was peaceful, that had family and security and safety. But alas, that was not obviously long lasting, because soon after that, a few years later, everything had changed. And the next memory that I remember is of me and my mother trying to flee the country before things truly did fall apart. My father was already outside the country and we were supposed to go and join him. So my mother and I left Mogadishu to travel outside to try and get to the border with Kenya to get into Kenya. And so we come to a home, a mud hut, a family that lives in a mud hut, to stay with them that night and then catch a bus the next morning to get closer to the border. But before we could actually spend that night, bombs started falling and you could hear the bombs going off. And poof, poof. And as a child, I was really scared. I could feel the ground shaking. However, the only thing that kept me feeling safe was knowing that my mother was there. The security that I had of having a parent there. And there was a woman who was in one of the rooms in the mud hut, and she was a pregnant woman. And when those bombs started falling, she started screaming and screaming. And the family who we were staying with, she was part of that family, they said to us, you can't stay here. You need to keep moving because you don't know whether the next bomb will fall in this house. And this woman is in labor. You've got to leave. We can't go with you. So my mother and I, my mother and I and my two younger sisters go off. And as we're traveling, we come across a soldier who's got this massive gun in his hand. And I remember being very scared. He had a beret on his head. A dark man in the night, the darkness of night. So all you could see was the silhouette of the man that he was with this massive gun. And my mother starts speaking to him, and she had told us before we left, do not speak. And so my mother speaks to the man, but my mother lies to the man. She tells him she is someone or of a tribe that she's not, but I know not to say anything. But I'm surprised at hearing my mother not tell the truth, and so I say nothing, because you know what? My mother is looking after us, and that's all that matters. So I go along with her, and we walk, and soon after that, being a child who has their parent and feels that security, we come into a marketplace where you catch the buses, to different places. And in that marketplace, they had everything that a child would be enticed with. It's like, oh, there's juice, and there's, sweets being sold, and there's rotisserie chicken, and I'm just looking around going, oh mommy, can we have that, and can we have that, and all forgotten, the bombs forgotten, the woman in labor, the soldier forgot. Just, I'm here now, this is so much fun. It felt like a fair. And that was the memory of me being really happy at the strength of knowing that my mother was there and she was going to look after us. Because you know what, the next day when we got to the border of Kenya, my mother wasn't with us anymore. I didn't realize that this was going to happen because I was only a child, but my mother couldn't come with us, so she let a Somali woman, take us to the border, just let us stay with a family relative in Nairobi, because my mother didn't have a passport to go into Kenya, so this woman was going to say, these 3 children are mine, so just to take us over, and my mother was going to find a way over. So that was literally me being parted from my mother. And I remember being put onto this plane with my little sisters, being frightened, confused, begging for my mother to come with us, but she couldn't come, and she waved and she says, Kauthar, look after your sisters. Remember, you're the eldest, look after them. And my little sister crying, screaming. But the thing that I remember from that journey was not just the separation, but how that my whole world felt like, the ground has been taken from under me, literally and figuratively, because the plane we were in was so small and so shaky. You could feel that, uncertainty inside of yourself and outside. And that was it. My mother wasn't there, and we were asked to stay with this aunt, a distant relative of my dad's. And we're staying with this woman. And this woman, I will never forget. I felt she was like bipolar. The most loving and kind and, cherishing mother in one hand, and the most vile and evil and cruel woman at the same time. To her daughter, she was all things sweet. But to her sister and myself and my siblings, she was just so awful. And I remember thinking, I just need to lay low and look after my sister. And she always said to look after your sisters. It's your job to look after your sisters at 5 or 6, if I remember correctly. And I remember one day we always stood outside. So we lived in this tower block in Nairobi, and she lived in this tower block in Nairobi, and we always stood, outside, the balcony, waiting, looking outside for my mother. And one day my little sister got her head around the railing. And I remember begging her to get it out. I was like, come on, get it out, please. I don't want to call this woman, because if you call her, I would bear the brunt of what happened here. And unfortunately, that is what happened. She'd pinch us and she'd get so angry. And I remember always living in holding my breath. And it felt like 100 years that I was living with this woman. But it was only 3 months. And there one day we were standing outside and I saw my mother coming along. My mother was wearing a white. And to me, that white, I don't understand why I remembered it. But if you think about it, I guess it's this angel, this bright light of hope and happiness and love was what it captured, her wearing white. So she came and that was it. We forgot about that woman. We left. We went to Tanzania to be with my dad in a home, and everything was back to normal again. This security and peacefulness and safety in a country that is Dar es Salaam, the home or the land of peace in Tanzania. And when we got there, it's a land of jambo and old people who are outside sitting, and neighborhoods, people are friendly with each other, and you had to greet your elders and people welcomed each other. And I remember being so happy, feeling this truly was it. This is where I belonged with my parents, in this home with these neighbors. Everything felt so perfect. But that yet again was short-lived when a woman who was again a distant relative came along, and she said, and being a relative in Somalia is all about tribes, and she came along and she said, how old is your daughter? She's 6. You should send her to Nairobi to come to school with my children, because I don't think you'll have an English education in Tanzania. Which is true, my parents couldn't afford private schools, but most of the schools taught in Swahili. And so she convinces my parents, and my parents go, yes. And that again was the beginning of me going from safety, security, and being with my parents and my sisters to a place of being unsafe. But that is another story that I will have to tell another time. But that was my journey. Thank you for listening to my earliest memories of being a child. I hope you enjoy, and thank you to Daedalus Theatre. Goodbye.